I think the previous video stopped running, but I'm gonna keep running as though it completed. I'm not sure what it captured or did, but what I was saying is that I was appreciating that. I was just thinking about, I was reasoning some things, and in the last video I said that I once had the insight that people of a law enforcement background, that law enforcement and military can be similar and can dovetail, but are not necessarily the same thing. But also, I think that medicine can be similar and dovetail into and play a part in those other fields, law enforcement and military. But law enforcement and military can also play a role in healthcare. And I actually saw a little bit of an example tonight when I was receiving some services. And what I was thinking is that, and I said in the previous videos, that law enforcement professionals that are recruiting law enforcement are not necessarily interested or compelled by someone with a military background. And sometimes you can have like antagonism and chauvinism, and also maybe different orientation between different tiers and forms of service, different service members, like where different branches of service in the armed services in the United States don't necessarily get along or get on with each other. And I think that's the same with different law enforcement branches, might be like that. And then maybe some of medicine might be like that. But you can appreciate that all that medicine, law enforcement, and military are service. They can be appreciated as service. And they're similar in that, like for a medical professional, a rank and file, and I don't mean that derogatorily, but a person doing more menial tasks with more oversight upon them would be similar to like a private taking orders. Would be like you're like a homemaker, or a health aide, a personal care attendant, like would be like a lower tier of that. Then you might have like a thing. In the past they used to have more of LPNs. I don't see as many LPNs anymore. That's like a step higher, and then you get to like all the way up to RN. That might be a little bit similar to like a an unlisted officer in the military, near about like similar pay grade, and also like scope of like capacity. For military it'd be like for hurting people, or achieving military objectives. For healthcare it'd be healing people and healthcare objectives. But you have like a similar like structure like that, like progress grade like that. And then you get all the way to like your physician assistant, or like nurse practitioner, and then all the way up to like or like an advanced RN, like with an RN with a PhD or something, or a graduate degree. And then you get into like different doctors, and then different doctors get, and then that might be like your officers, like the ones that have been through ROTC in college, would be like a similar, would be like a similar analogy. And then beyond that you would have like surgeons, and then like different surgeons and researchers. But the researchers would be even higher, but you'd have like surgeons. And that might be like your general, like colonels, um uh like higher lieutenants, colonels, majors, captain. Your captain would be like the lower tier of that. But then like where you still like a captain might be like a lot like a surgeon, where it's like it's getting to be an officer, but it's still a lot of work, like a unlisted, like an enlisted officer. And then, but then you'd have like your surgeon would be like maybe like your colonel or major or something like that. Then, but then that's high now. But then you go even higher, and then like that might be like a hospital official, like a health unit coordinator or something like that. And then at a certain point it overlaps from being an officer, or a personnel, to actually being a political figure. That you could probably reason similar analogy in education, both like in primary and secondary education. It'd probably break down similar like that. But at the higher tier, you get into being like an elected official. You're near about a political figure because of the overlap between the demands of like overseeing and controlling a military operation or a healing operation, a hospital, but then also the resources that would require, and therefore the cooperation and support of a community that would require. You transcend into a political figure at a certain point, and that might be where those all converge at the top like that. Education, you would get the higher tier, that would be like a superintendent, then the or like a dean at a college or a president of a college. Then higher than that, like in the military, you would have like some of your there's a I don't I'm not versed in it enough to know, but there'd be like some kind of, or you might have like a mayor or like or even a religious person, but the actual the high tier of the rank structure in the military, at a certain point you overlap and transcend into political arena, and the political agent official would likely have more say so, the ultimate say so, than even the highest military personnel. But the real power would probably break down differently than what it is on paper, because the real meat and potatoes, the real baseball, is a combination of official power and de facto. I got that in a different book, but I can't recall what book that was pointing out the difference between de facto power. That might have been Nassim Nicholas Taleb, the difference between de facto power, de facto, that is real, in effect, implied, practical, but not necessarily official. But then there's the official also, and the official is almost like the battle lines of rank. Like as a battlefield, you'd have the battle lines, but then all the things that go on around the battle lines are deeper than the battle line, but the battle line is still the battle line. That's like the rank. And that might be like that for the military, but then also healthcare, education, a lot of different fields. They probably operate similar, they break down similar, but then because they've been conceived by similar minds, but then they overlap at the top just into politics. But they're also constituted within politics and most abide within politics, but at essence they come down to politics. And then with the military like that, you'd probably have the general be a high order of that, but then even what would be even higher than a general is what you do not know about. That'd actually be like maybe even a scientist creating horrible, wicked stuff that you don't know how it, but the actual where the weaponry is coming from, the ammunition is coming from, might be an actual medical expert, researcher, scientist, an engineer, something like that, where they're actually so skilled that they don't need to be known or having anything to do publicly with the military or with medicine or with education, but they're fathoming and working behind the scenes and having they're having an overwhelming influence and outcome. Just a researcher would be like that, or a scientist, or someone that's nondescript that you don't know what the hell they have to do with anything military or medical, but, or more so I'm saying like military, but they're actually having real, you get high enough in rank and you don't even need the insignia anymore, because it's that crucial that you would do better with being subtle at that point. So like you have like this, everyone is looking at everyone's stripes on their shirt, their uniform, and they're more and more impressed by the stripes first, and then the stars and stuff like that. But then here go this one that's not even wearing a uniform, and they're not dressed like a doctor, and they're telling everyone what to do, and it's like damn, who's that? You can just feel the power at a certain point. You can't even see what their rank is, but you can feel that they would have to be important to just be here and be telling people what to do or not saying nothing. But then even higher than that would be like just the simple shareholders, because nothing moves without money. So the shareholder, it might be like some grandma somewhere way far away, or someone's grandpa that you don't know about, or even like their child who's still in school that they're teaching about investing, and that they gave money to invest, and now that person actually has a stake in a share in some crazy military weaponry or some private prison or some medical invention or whatnot. That's how the actual power gets down. So the real power is probably really properly a nobody that actually knows how to invest. I had a family way back in the day. Some of the I don't come from like a wealthy family, but some of my family members had education going back, and just the standpoint of them to have education in these different times where it's been hard to come by. It's still hard to come by now, but it's been hard to come by. I had some family members that were not educated past sixth grade, but they knew enough and were savvy about investing, so they were able to be have their needs met through different iterations of like the Great Depression and beyond that. They simply survived that and had and actually had something to show for themselves, not being educated, because they knew what investing was. But I'm not trying to promote investing with this, but just to say that I'm just showing the way that power breaks down, is that you get all the way up of like where they're actually the real work, the grit is probably at those lower ranks, the private in the military, the corporal in the military, maybe some of their leadership, the health aide in a hospital, the LPN in a hospital, the nurse in a hospital, is where the real heavy lifting is going. And then the power goes all the way, way up into political. But then beyond that would likely just be the shareholders beyond that I can fathom as a civilian. But what I wanted to say is that, like in a hospital, you can appreciate that there's a lot of gossip going on, worse than high school, a lot of these gossip. And if you're really trained in healthcare, there's a need for privacy. Privacy is important in healthcare, but I would say it's more of an ideal in healthcare. A lot of it, at least as regular civilian patients go, is that it's not very difficult to breach people's privacy in hospital, just because these hospital people are gossiping, and I just overheard what's going on with this and that one because they're gossiping like that. But then also people's friends and family gossip the same way, and it's very damaging. Gossip can be a lot more damaging than a person can generally appreciate, because just hearsay gossip, reputation in the modern time, but especially in the past, it can get you into these different medical arenas where you now have a diagnosis placed upon you that affects your self-esteem first, then your capacity and agency and facility with different ways of employing yourself, because you need confidence to do things well. So if someone's undermining your self-esteem, they're undermining your confidence, and therefore your performance, and therefore your sustenance and your livelihood and your life at that point, if they're affecting your confidence. But it likely can stem from your reputation, at least with the preoccupation with things like mental health nowadays, and how mental health can be a little bit of like quasi-science, quack doctory to my taste, a lot of it. But but it can amount to real social and professional repercussions that get all the way back to affecting a person's physical body and then their real health. So you're first, you're maybe comfortable around someone you shouldn't be comfortable about, or you divulge something around something you shouldn't divulge about because you had not known that person is inimical to you, or can potentially be inimical to you to the point of injuring you, friends, family, loved ones, whatnot. Then your reputation takes the first blow. Then your reputation lands you into the radar of people who they have invested a fortune to get a training. They've invested their time, which is their life, their opportunity to live, to obtain that training. Then they've undergone hitching their life to a profession that invokes that training. Here you go, a potential client of theirs. Would they not have an interest in you being a client and further being a client if that's their standpoint in meeting you? You come across someone, but your reputation could have potentially got you there. Then they place a diagnosis on you, and that diagnosis affects your self-esteem and therefore performance, but then also the perception of you, because you can't keep a secret at all from people, but especially in the modern times, because they probably say, like in the past, like in different times before the World Wide Web, that we have now, that the walls had ears in different countries, but now that'd be like a that'd be like a that's an understatement now to say that the walls have ears. But but then so your reputation got you there, got you your diagnosis. Your diagnosis can affect your professional opportunities, and your reputation can, and then that can get around to compromising your income. Then your income compromises your means. Now you're having less to eat, less of opportunities for living accommodations, whatnot. It gets back all around to affecting your physical body when this and that doesn't work, and you take an injury or loss, or you're not eating, whatever happened, it can get all the way back to your physical body. But it started with your reputation, actually. And your and so they decided that you had a medical condition based on their training in the first place before ever having met you. Yeah, I'm getting trained like this and that because I already know I'm gonna meet someone like this or that I've never met before. And when I meet them, I'm gonna say that this and that I learned about makes you an unhealthy person, which you may not have necessarily been unhealthy at that time. By the time they get done doing their number on you, which they've invested in, and likely your community gets on board with that, then you actually do sustain something to your physical body. So, but they had actually decided that you had a physical problem in the first place before you got to having one. So, or injury or whatnot. So it's a little bit like a you can see the business in that and the teeth in that when I say that. But I was thinking that it is really endemic around but gossip is a problem from that standpoint in life, but especially in healthcare. That must have been appreciated by certain people like think tanks, to where this HIPAA is very important on the surface. But you don't have to, it's not very difficult to just walk into any medical place and watch HIPAA get breached. Now you would imagine that these people making these laws like HIPAA have been to a hospital before, so they've likely heard how arbitrary and simple HIPAA can be breached, but yet they still put it forward. So even HIPAA is probably part of the game. Is that so? A lot of things, you have a lot of different industries, and in a lot of different industries, yeah, this is what the rules are on the surface. This is what the quota is for a business on the surface. This is also what the safety protocol is and the guidelines is on the surface for the business. But anyone who's worked at that business, and likely even the people that make the guidelines, they know that those guidelines aren't feasible and realistic as we're talking and dealing about with human beings. So what the guidelines are for is that when people mess up bad enough, which, because everyone's messing up all the time because we're human beings daily, people are messing up daily. Did you even walk out your door today before you made some kind of mistake? Likely not. I don't think. For you could say, they say if you according to there's a book about justice in the United States as it pertains to African American people. Jim Crow, the modern Jim Crow. If you say that book that you can't even follow a car for like 2 blocks without a person likely making some form of mistake, if you were to be that technical. So a police can pull over anyone they want based on a failure to a failure in driver performance if they want to, just simply by the book, because it's not humanly possible likely to drive more than a couple blocks without making some form of error or omission in the strictest technical sense, according to that person that wrote that book. So that's actually probably also how the criminal justice system is sustained, is upon the lines of traffic, because you see all these people incarcerated, all these formidable, valiant, well-connected people incarcerated in prison. How the hell did they you seen what kind of incompetent or maybe undertrained or just rookie, naive people work in and around law enforcement? How the hell did they wrangle all those people of those kind of backgrounds that they got up there incarcerated? It likely didn't necessarily have to be more sophisticated than traffic stops. If you appreciate that most people are going to get around to getting in a vehicle at some point, if they have to do business, or just in the modern paradigm, people are going to be mixed up and around vehicles. If you just have a good way of working a system based on pulling people over in vehicles, that probably does quite a bit of the legwork of incarcerating popularity to the games that we played of cops and robbers as kids. And then on top of that, different interrogation tactics, and like they would say like RICO now, like for prosecuting things, but a lot of things a lot of detective work might be like also like a RICO, and just like cornering people into to getting people to figure out what the hell happened by pulling over this one and then verbally cornering them this way. But um so what I meant to say is that I think that a lot of different policies in different fields, such as HIPAA in healthcare, it's more so just to make a game of the whole racket, because it had been a racket in the first place, and that can be interchangeable and conveyed by means of like a game. So a lot of things are a game, even HIPAA. But then when people mess up, as they are going to mess up bad enough that you are obliged, or maybe lucrative or expedient, to prosecute or to look into what the hell happened, then you have these different standards that we're held to, so you can properly put it down on whoever needs to take the blame. I had that explained to me by a person in professional transportation, is that one of the reasons that things aren't completely automated is just because when things do go wrong, you need something. He said shit rolls downhill. So you need some means of passing off the blame and liability, and that's part of the role of different like transportation professionals, is that you would have something like a pre-trip. You're tasked with observing and surveying the well-being and maintenance of a vehicle, which a lot of it you can do as a driver, but some things you cannot humanly be aware of all the things that can go wrong. But since you're tasked with the pre-trip observation, when things do go wrong, you now neatly and conveniently can be placed with and charged. I don't mean to say necessarily charged, but you can be appreciated as blameworthy, since you had been tasked with surveying the vehicle per policy. So a lot of policies are for mitigating liability to away from the true power holders, to just as you would pass off the labor down, you also pass the liability down, and that's done by means of policy. I think is that policy isn't meant to be carried out. You more so look like an idiot if you try to carry out policy in a lot of roles, military, medicine, transportation, whatnot. You try to go by the book, by the letter, that can get you ostracized because it may not be feasible. That's understood by professionals, veterans, but and it's just it would not necessarily likely be practical if you try to go verbatim by whatever policy you have going on. But then sometimes the policy actually is more so serious, and even more so. HIPAA is already serious enough. You can get in a hell of a lot of trouble if you mess up around HIPAA. But as privacy goes within bureaucracy, that is actually serious and meant to be carried out to the letter more so. Since we're humans, there's no carrying it out all the way to the letter, because there's always a margin for error and a necessity for a margin of error as human beings go, because you can't overlay a preconceived policy or concept or rule onto human behavior and goings on, because there will be some challenge and eventuality as human goes that will confound anything that's preconceived. But I read a book that was saying that, I think it was a dictionary of sociology, saying that certain fields, especially bureaucracy, that's like the different metrics in social, that's like managing human capital, social, like HR, caring from HR, that's bureaucracy. That's actually managing human social structure, but that's actually all of life. That's the caste system that amounts to the spreading and the sharing, the conserving, and the confiscating of privileges that amount to resources first, position, property, livelihood, health, experience, privilege to exist upon the earth. That all comes down to like a system of privilege and lack of privilege, and that's controlled specifically by bureaucracy. Something that's interesting is that people wouldn't look at cybersecurity people as bureaucrats, but actually in the past you didn't have the same World Wide Web apparatus, but now that we do, a lot of your cybersecurity people and that similar type of work, IT also, but a lot of cybersecurity that has assumed the bureaucracy of the past. In the past, it used to be like files put away in an office somewhere. It was still managing human beings and their privileges, but now and their duties also, and duty and lack of duty is also a form of privilege. But the that has, and then in the as we were coming into the digital phase, like the last 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, near about maybe 30 years, whatever you would have going on as bureaucracy has been attended by IT and people and overseen by IT. IT had been like, as I was breaking down those other tiers of power structure, I think that up until recently and currently, IT would be the actual the higher tier overseers over bureaucrats, but bureaucrats themselves have had to do more with computers as things are digital now. But there's still something of bureaucrats where they have the bureaucratic training, like understanding of laws and different social services and dynamics and different like things like different forms of census taking, because the census is not just the census at every 10 years. Also, when you go to different people like hospitals, different stuff, they ask you about, oh yeah, what about this and that, and what about your family members, and what about 2 generations back. They're actually taking census at that point. And it's the same with like when people are like, you could say morgues are like that, and different things about people being born. These different agencies that have contact with human beings, they also are conveniently in position to take down information about those human beings, and therefore they're like a point of census. But then your bureaucrats, they also have facility. They're like a mid. So you have you go in to get taken in for something, and they're giving you services, but they're also taking census information. But then also what they do for you, and as different version iterations of these different agencies cross over, like from like identification, DMV, hospital, whatnot, you get into like a legal component. So the combination of census and legal component and savviness within that necessitates a bureaucrat as a specific skill set. It has to till recently, but that may be changing. But the bureaucrat themselves, they're using computer apparatus, and then the computer apparatus, so they therefore are also a little bit something of IT themselves, but more so of bureaucrats. But then IT oversees them because they don't have the same savviness, graces, but maybe also customer service as a bureaucrat would have. But then the IT is neatly next to bureaucracy, and now I think in the process of replacing IT. So in the past, a bureaucrat might have asked IT for help, but they didn't know they were training the IT for their job. So now these different cybersecurity people, they almost contact you similar to a bureaucrat would, like where in the past, if you made a mistake, a bureaucratic person might approach you at one point to look into what the hell you did or didn't do. But now cybersecurity might be like that, where cybersecurity is checking in with you, where you're not necessarily a criminal, or likely really if they really know their job, like we say they have this many years of training about cyber crime and whatnot. Do you really think this little old lady that tried to draw money out the ATM at 11 o'clock at night is necessarily a horrible, experienced veteran criminal, as serious as you're engaging her with cybersecurity? Likely not, but you would still have a reason to check in with what didn't go according to the proper means of dispersing privileges and claiming privileges, or demanding duties. But the cybersecurity is like that now, and I just wanted to point that out. But what I was appreciating is that in a hospital you get a lot of gossip, but I think some of it is just because a lot of a hospital is about power. So wherever you have power, according to Robert Greene, you'll have a court forming. Anywhere there's a anywhere there's a configuration of power, and therefore a hierarchy, what will attend that will be different forms of courting, entertaining, bantering, and especially gossiping. The gossiping being the more potent and deadly. Maybe it can be a blessing when it works in your favor, but more so potent, deadly, inimical, pernicious current within the bantering, networking, entertaining, jousting at times, courting at times, all that within something that has to do with power and power hierarchy. All that amounts to like a court, but the baseline and the penalty and the current, it's also gossip first and foremost. So from that standpoint, you may not be able to isolate gossip from healthcare, because healthcare deals with a lot of power differentials, whether you mean to or not. This one's in agony, curled over in pain, and this one's getting ready to go on vacation, and this one's somewhere in the middle. That's like power like that. So there's a lot of dynamics of power, but I would imagine a lot of law enforcement might be like that, where law enforcement, they probably gossip a lot, and even the law enforcement that's in hospitals, they gossip a lot, but not necessarily as much as healthcare professionals, but they gossip a lot in law enforcement, that we can overhear as civilians, but probably more in privacy. But then also military, I think they gossip a lot too about other military and whatnot. Military gossip a lot. You can imagine some officers. The gossip might be more interesting by like enlisted people, but you can imagine how much officers would gossip when they get off into privacy. But what I wanted to say is that it's interesting that, so you think about like, so healthcare, I think it holds a lot of the power in place in society, because it shapes the caste system of like who can do what, who gets what cool jobs, who doesn't, who gets what privilege and entitlement as far as the services that are due for like people who are disabled. That would be compensation from the state. That's still power, that and actually that, because it's still viable finance resources. So you must watch that like a hawk if you're trying to keep power. That might be some of the what's so significant about healthcare, is that it's mitigating and channeling different subsidies to be enjoyed by, and enjoy, I don't mean as in fun, but to be received by people who are maybe disabled or injured. But that's still a form of entitlement and therefore power, even to be disabled to some degree. It amounts to and factors into power, and you must account for all power if you're going to have facility with power. So healthcare is important from that standpoint. But then also just having control over life and death, that might be where healthcare and military, and then you could say maybe education, in such as education gives people opportunities at livelihood, but especially with and that's still significant, living and dying, the chances and the pricing and cost of life is a function of the opportunities of life, and therefore a function of education. But military and medicine, they somewhat have power over life and death. The healthcare, ostensibly the positive benign aspect of that, and then the military, into a lesser but still significant degree, law enforcement, the hard the penalizing part of that, but it's still control over the life and death is and therefore power is life and death. When power is on the table, it's life and death is what makes it power. But so other industries can all dovetail into that dynamic. But just as a case in point, it's interesting how much resource and effort go into healthcare and military. But what I was thinking is that you, a lot of times you think about like, so this many people go into healthcare. Why do we need so many people to go into healthcare? Is it to save that many lives? Potentially, partly, likely, but not totally. We need this many people in healthcare to manage power, so that power can be dispersed. You need a lot of agents. So like, you take the earth like this, right? Like, so the earth is immaculate. You see these mountains, these forests, these landscapes. It's immaculate. It's beautiful. Wow. God did that. But it's also like, I have my father's one person that cared for my father. He was he was a interesting person and a free thinker. He was also he was an interesting person, and he would say things like, they say the Big Bang, right? But if you think about it, outer space really doesn't make any noise, and neither does the Earth. Maybe you could say storms make noise, but a lot of the things that go on in a day that make the Earth as beautiful it is, it doesn't make any sound, but it's beautiful and immaculate. Wow, God created this whole Earth, but how did God do it? We never saw God's hand. How does God do it invisibly like that? What about all these little ants and insects and bugs and creatures and even people that you see busy about all day long? Are they not having a hand in maintaining and managing and uh, uh, working what we have for a beautiful environment? Are not all these insects, the little tiny things that insects do, the little leaf that you see a caterpillar nipping on, the little twig that an ant is lifting, are they not tirelessly managing the environment to the smallest degree that whole time? Are they not doing that? But then, so it's similar like with healthcare and military and law enforcement and education and this and that. You need that many agents, that many ants. Yes, you have different degrees of ants. You have sugar ants, you have army ants, you have drones, you have queens, you have all that different stuff. But by and large, you got a lot of ants going on to manage something that big as and beautiful as nature, so that you actually did somewhat see things being maintained that whole time. You just didn't know that something as great as what you're calling great could be as humble or have its objectives overseen and completed by something as humble as you would call an ant or an insect or a bee or a butterfly or whatnot. But it's similar like with healthcare, is that you need that many agents right there in the face of that many people who would potentially draw resources or draw services if you want to have an overwhelming ironclad fist over what it means to have power and therefore have power. Because if it's not total, then it's not power. But similar with the military is like that, is that you got this many people going off into the military. It's been this long since we saw something like World War II. But why are all these people getting off and going off into the military still, and it be stamped inviolable? Because you still need that many agents if you're going to have power. But what I've appreciated is that a lot of the military, cybersecurity, law enforcement, and also military, you would think that, okay, so a military person is a soldier, they're military. A civilian don't got nothing to do with the military. So when the military are training, when they're researching different apparatus that they'll employ, we think they're getting up to go. We're presented as though they're getting up to go against another military and military people that don't got nothing to do with being a civilian. Like they're going up against another military structure. But what's another military structure composed of? It's composed of people. And we know that fire doesn't care who it burns. So part of the military mechanism beast military industrial complex, it's not just to go up against other military. Yes, it goes up against other military, but it goes up against other people. And it likely doesn't have to stop at going up against people from another national border, because as soon as a civilian can say that, that border seems a little bit arbitrary. Why did you put it right there? Is that border really real? Is that border really what it means to be here and there? Is there really a difference between 5 feet into this country and 5 feet into that country, except for when guns are pointing in your face? A military might also appreciate, these borders, they are kind of BS because we made them and we intended them to be BS. So maybe these borders aren't as important as what we need people to think they are, as those people participate in politics and as we draw resources from politics. Maybe the borders aren't the be all end all. Maybe a military has said that before. So from that standpoint, maybe a military has not been shy about training, or at least intending to train, that means point their weapons or their machinations against their own people, because power is power, but power is not power unless it's complete. A lot of people might overlook that when you take a like an oath to go into the military to enforce the I think it's something about to serve and protect the Constitution from enemies, foreign and domestic. You didn't know you didn't know what that was meant by that domestic. You thought it meant bad people domestic, or maybe spies or infiltrators domestic, or like a civil war or some faction like that. No, maybe it means little old people. Maybe GI Joe wasn't trained to go up against GI this one and that one. Maybe GI Joe was getting trained to go up against against Joe. GI Joe versus Joe. That's the real military. But it doesn't necessarily have to be bloody in your face fighting to achieve the objective. What it can be is like, so when you go out in society, in the different ways you're impressed by power, and that probably partially garners your participation and obedience within the society, is that damn, things are that sophisticated. So I just went to a hospital. They just called an Uber for me. They were able to communicate with that Uber invisibly, that is radio, but which had been military before, but they communicated with that Uber invisibly in this sophisticated sophisticated hospital with its power structure and all the different things that impressed me in the hospital. But a lot of the things that impressed you in the hospital, they may have been engineered either in the military or in the education that's like the state schools, the colleges and universities that are paid for by state money. That's money that's garnered at gunpoint by put all the way up to military if it took that, or by resources that were carved out by what a military has made borders for. But the inclination towards research in education, medicine, but then also and especially military, and then the propriety over that, but the monopoly over that, such as things like GPS, because as that Uber driver drives you home and impresses you with the impressiveness of the system in locating where you live, wherever in the hell it is, they're going to locate it instantly, not having, they just get an invisible message on the screen. Oop, there's someone to pick up. Oop, I just dropped you off there. I don't know what the hell, how I got you here, but oop, I did it. And now I'm going to go run off and make more money. Oop, you're impressed by the system, but that actually came from military research. That came from the military, the GPS, but likely the military got that from smart or intelligent people in colleges, like universities. So also, you're being recruited to go to college, right? You're an intelligent person, right? So ostensibly, you're going to college for your own sake to better your life, but likely, potentially, you have had some talents recognized. The military might recognize people's talents in terms of like athletic performance or also intellectual performance, but a university might recognize intellectual performance. According to King Noble, what the college appreciated in you when they were recruiting you, and as you succeeded and made it through the college, was not your true intelligence, but your ability to obey and conform to orders, because you're more so useful as power goes, in the strictest sense of power, as you are willing and capable of conforming and abiding, but also maybe a little bit of creativity. So in school, you were forced to do these research papers, but you also had enough creativity to make them a little bit cooler or more presentable than, or more savvy than your counterparts. So all of you had orders to, this is how in the hell your research paper is supposed to be, and what it's supposed to talk about, and what the references are supposed to be about, and also how the references are supposed to look. You were handed all that verbatim, and if you would have messed up about that, you would have been penalized. But also, you were happy to do so and a little bit creative to do so. And it's actually difficult to do things that you're demanded of, but also creative. That's a lot of the work of school. So you do that, and now you're an outstanding student. But all I'm saying is that people may get recruited to these schools because they can obey orders. According to King Noble, the YouTuber, your willingness to conform is what's appreciated in you in a lot of fields, especially academics and also professions. But then also you were a little bit creative and savvy within that. that may fashion and function, or may fashion and rot what it means to have these different apparatus that are employed by the military first, but then by the military over and upon a civilian population, not the least of which their own, to give both the sensation and application of power that's not checked or not questioned because it's impressive. So what I've appreciated is that a lot of the military, this effort to sustain a military, it's for different sophisticated ways of social control, not necessarily against other militaries, which at the higher level are probably owned by the same interests. It's about control over people. That's what the military actually is. You think it's about all this commando stuff and fighting bad guys and stuff like that. Before they had been bad guys, they probably were marginalized and ostracized by the system that's not intended to work for everyone's favor, because it wouldn't be power again. It had its privilege, but it's also privilege for being privileged and powerful for being powerful. So like I've said in other videos, like dollar bill. So according to the author Tashriq Bey, dollar bill is an oxymoron. Dollar being an actual positive value traditionally, as a dollar goes in the meaning of that word, and bill being more so of a debt or liability traditionally, as that word would have the inflection or would imbue. So a dollar is both a penalty and a cost and a liability and a debt and a deficit to one, equally and as much as it is a benefit and an advantage to another. Such is the preoccupation with finance in modern context, because you could say a better word than finance would be privilege. So I'm going to study finance at the finest college. That means I'm going to study privilege at the finest college, because the actual money, the money in terms of value, is not what it is on the surface, as it's been removed from the gold standard. For an example, in the United States, value is not exactly value, but privilege, for it to be privileged, there must be exactly a discrepancy in who is privileged and who is at a deficit for it to function and be experienced as privilege. So a lot of the sophisticated finance in our life, that is, so everyone is hella serious about finance. You can have any person that you know that has any background, they're cool about anything. They're spiritual, they're open-minded, they're tough, but they're also kind of funny and sexy. They're bad guys. They live they live their own they're rugged, they're mysterious, they're funny, they're all these things. But you mess up about finance around anyone, and you see the fangs come out of anyone. I'd probably be the same. I'm not trying to taunt nobody, but I'm saying I'm a open-minded person doing like content. But if I got messed over out of finance, that would suck. That would feel like that would suck, and that would move anyone to feel a type of way if you got messed over out of finance. What happened was you got messed up out of privilege, because I think the sophisticated symmetry that is trying to be achieved with the different finance that's very serious in our society. What's serious is privilege, even as a part of it, maybe more serious than value, which is also a part of privilege, is privilege. The haves and the have-nots. But also you have the haves and the have-nots, but then a lot of the haves and the have-nots, they are compensated and take great lengths and training to go into the business of keeping the haves as the haves and the have-nots as the have-nots. The having and the having not is as important and more important than the haves and the have-nots in this society, and it takes great effort. It takes so you take out World War II, right? In World War II, according to a family member of mine, that was a full-scale mobilization that you had in World War II as the United States goes in their participation. What you have now is a full-scale, even more so than World War II. If you can imagine how much logistics and effort and cooperation and morale and group and esteem and patriotism and nationalism went into a full-scale mobilization in World War II. From what we have like of artifacts and like testimony, it takes that much and that much more to the present day to keep the privilege in place. full scale, all out mobilization for privilege is what we have and what we go into in our different vocations. So what we do not for livelihood, for the privilege that is, it what we do for work is one thing, and you can do a job your whole life. You do a job your whole life, you do your job well, but you mess up one time and you weren't congruent as finance goes. You stole $100, or you lost the company $100 after you worked for 50 years. $100. Buddy, we're gonna have to talk to you. Yeah, this is a police officer, and we just had to say, can you tell us what happened with this and that? Okay, yeah, you're gonna need to walk with him out the door. So it's serious. When you messed up, you may have made that company $100,000 a year. Probably we make these companies a lot more than we're compensated, I think, because they wouldn't be compensating you unless you're making them more. So just because you made a company 50,000 or 10,000, 50,000, $100,000, that's not necessarily unique, because probably the average person at a minimum wage role, they made their company a lot more than minimum wage. Likely they made their company 10, 15, 50, 100,000. Even if you're making your company twice that, or like 500,000 a year, a million a year for 10 years, 20 years, like they would say like high. I remember like in the pandemic, it was like high value man makes between 100 and 120,000. If you make between 100 and 120,000, whoever compensates you likely made many times that. I can't say accurately. That'd be misrepresenting and fake news if I try to do a statistic like that, because there probably is a statistic, but you likely made them at least 2 or 3 or more fold more than what you were compensated if you're a high value person, as that trope used to go for 100 to 120,000. But had you been a high value person for one or so, they would say in the pandemic, like with the work of Kevin Samuels, he said you're a high value man when you've been a professional or successful blue collar, and you've made 100,000 for like two or 3 years or something like that. But say you did it for 2 or 3, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40 years, making that much for a company, several fold times 100,000 or 120. You mess up around 100, you intentionally or just carelessly lost the company $100. You may be going away on a vacation that sucks, that you didn't pay for a few years, that you're also going to have to work for, because you messed. So what's significant more so than the value that you stand for, that you earned that company and that you could potentially continue to bring to that company, what's more important is the privilege. You messed up this amount of finance, that is, you messed up this amount of privilege, you messed up this amount of dollar bills, the dollar and the bill being significant. You mess up this much amount of having, have notting, and the maintenance of that when you messed up around finance. So I just wanted to point that out with this video, that I've appreciated some of the overlapping and similarity and necessity for medical professionals and healthcare professionals, and to some degree academic professionals or like learned people. And it amounts to what the purpose of is impressing people, but also maintaining people and keeping social control, because that's what's more valuable than money. Actually, control is more valuable than money, because what are you going to do with money if you can't secure it? That is, what are you going to secure if you don't have control? So control is more important. So it's control first, then privilege, which is a part of control but secondary, then value, then maybe health, whatnot down the line. But what's important is control. So this apparatus, this much investment in the military, we think that these militaries are fighting each other and are getting ready to fight each other, which they may or may not be. Also, if they do so, it will be for a lucrative outcome. There's a business at play if it does come to that. But even as they're not in locked in imminent conflict, they're likely owned by the same interests at the higher levels. And so it's political theater, is theater, it's theatrics, but it's also lucrative and vital. But what's more important about these military and the real work that they do behind the scenes and the real outcome that they have against people, and not necessarily foreign combatants, but against people and their own people at any level. Control is, if you're going to control, it has to be utter. And it doesn't matter if you're controlling an army or one person receiving healthcare benefits, the control must be utter and ironclad and thorough, as is ensured by things like finance. And but also as that's been finance and bureaucracy, but then also as that's been translated and transmuted into the digital ethers, you bring on IT to that. So what's a good job to go into? Medicine, military, bureaucracy, IT. You may see how that overlaps. But what's important is the control is really important. So it takes this much effort to train up a military and a medical profession and these different outstanding institutions and whatnot. It takes that much effort, and what their function is control. And so when you see something like law enforcement or military or people concerned about an individual, so like, oh yeah, this person was shoplifting, they stole a candy bar, that's hella serious to a law enforcement, whatnot, to a cybersecurity. Beep beep, a candy bar was stolen. Oh snap! Let's send the National Guard. You don't actually send the National Guard for a stolen candy bar, but it's actually as serious as the National Guard for a stolen candy bar. That's actually the how serious they would feel around you if they got to discovering you take a candy bar. But also, as the implications go, it is as serious whether a candy bar had been stolen or an exchange had taken place with another military, simply because it's about control, and control is all or nothing. So I just wanted to do that video about some things that were on my mind. And I had more ideas, but this one's getting long, so I'm gonna leave it there. And I was just thinking about some of these doctors and soldiers and officers and incredible people that are about us. What are they about us for? Is to maintain control. And that, I think that might be the real function of the different things. And just as fire doesn't care who it burns, control doesn't care who it worries about. And anything that's an obstruction to control, an individual, a group, whatnot, it doesn't necessarily have to do or be anything around combat, but just anything that creates a problem for control invokes and necessitates potentially the entire apparatus of control to sequester and quell whatever dissident or anomaly took place, and to whatever degree challenge control, because a challenge is a challenge. And however humble or incompetent or delusional something or someone that would challenge control, it's still a challenge. And it's not control if it's not utter, and it's not responding to a challenge if it's not potentially viable to go all the way to any degree of anything. So I've appreciated that violence is like, there's been different people to say that violence is like wildfire and escalates rapidly. So violence can go from fighting with sticks to nuclear bombs rapidly. When people are arguing, like you're starting to argue, and now your family's getting involved, or the neighbors are getting involved, or heaven forbid the police are getting involved. The energy being exchanged in two people arguing, from kids arguing over toys to the adolescents, to adults arguing, whatnot. That energy that's exchanged as conflict, as antagonism, as strife, it can escalate from that to any degree. And it's the same thing with violence, can go to any degree very quickly. But also control and a challenge to control, or the necessity to implement control, it can invoke any degree of the entire apparatus, and is as serious as any degree of apparatus. You can appreciate it as similar like with fire. So a match doesn't have to be very big to be very serious. if people are playing with like if you're in a dry area, or just in a building anywhere, but especially a dry area, people are playing with matches. That small match can potentially make an entire region go up in flame. Um, that's actually how serious an anomaly or a dissident or an undesirable is to a system of utter and sophisticated control, or at least the value and the aspiration for so much control is that anything that is an anomaly is as serious as a match, and is approached that serious as a match as the values of the system go. So I'll just do this is a little bit of talk just about the system.